Hi, I'm Jeff. Imagine a murder case with no eyewitnesses, no clear fingerprints, and a crime scene scrubbed to near perfection. Yet a single fiber, thinner than a human hair, quietly points to the killer. Today, we're going to follow that one thread from the victim's coat to a factory floor, and finally, to a set of car keys in a suspect's hand. Stay with me, because the science you're about to hear feels like magic until you see how methodical it really is. Forensic science lives and dies by one simple idea known as Locard's exchange principle. Every contact leaves a trace. What most offenders don't grasp is how small a trace can be. In this case, detectives recovered a pale blue-green strand clinging to the seam of the victim's jacket. It wasn't much, just a curved, tri-lobed synthetic filament. But it survived rain, motion, and handling. Why tri-lobed? Some manufacturers shape fibers like tiny propellers to reflect light and resist wear. That cross-section, invisible to the naked eye, was the first clue that this wasn't a common household thread. Back in the lab, examiners began with polarized light microscopy to capture the fiber's optical signature, then moved to microspectrophotometry to measure the dye's exact light absorption pattern. Think of it as a fingerprint for color. They followed with FTIR to read the polymer's chemical backbone and scanning electron microscopy to study the cross-section in razor-sharp detail. Layer by layer, the fiber started speaking. It said nylon. It said tri-lobed. It said blue-green with a very specific dye package. And crucially, it suggested an origin not from clothing, but from automotive carpeting. But here's the unexpected truth. Finding a fiber and proving it came from one specific car are very different tasks. Good forensics respects probability, so the lab compared that spectrum against reference collections, manufacturing catalogs, and production runs. The dye curve matched a limited series of automotive trunk liners made by a particular supplier during a narrow window. That meant thousands of cars worldwide, but only a small fraction registered within this region. The thread was tightening. Detectives quietly built a list of vehicles that could have shared that exact fiber type. Meanwhile, they re-walked the victim's last known route and canvassed for cars seen idling near the scene. One sedan surfaced more than once in statements, a model consistent with the target production run. The owner? Friendly, helpful, quick to chat. You probably haven't heard this part before, but offenders who rely on routine often lean on charm to manage suspicion. He even volunteered that he kept his car immaculate, a claim that would soon matter more than he realized. A warrant allowed examiners to vacuum the trunk and cabin with sterile filters. Under the microscope, the lab found the same tri-lobed blue-green fibers embedded in the trunk liner, and just as important, they found matching victim fibers caught in the rough undersurface of the trunk's weather strip. Transfer and persistence are the twin engines of trace evidence. The killer had assumed a clean car was a safe car, but clean simply means fewer particles to distract the eye. It doesn't erase the ones that matter. Still, the science had to withstand hard questions. Could secondary transfer explain it? The lab staged controlled studies. How many fibers move during brief contact? How long they persist on wool versus cotton? How humidity affects loss? The numbers aligned with direct contact in a confined space rather than incidental contamination. And there was more. The fiber's delustrant, the tiny mineral additive that dulls unnatural shine, showed a particular particle size under electron microscopy, consistent with one manufacturer's recipe. It was like hearing a regional accent inside a single strand. But here's why it really matters. The fiber didn't solve the case alone. It told detectives where to look next. Phone records placed the suspect's car near the victim's last known location within the critical time window. Toll cameras captured that same sedan entering, then exiting, a corridor that matched the projected dump route. Psychological profiling filled in the human side, a need for control, comfort with repetitive patterns, and a belief that careful planning could erase risk. Routine had been his shield. Now it was a trail. The interview came next. Investigators let silence work. The suspect insisted he never carried passengers in the trunk, an answer no one had asked for. That volunteered denial hinted at rehearsed guilt. When shown a photo of the trunk liner, he claimed it had been replaced years ago, a statement at odds with the supplier's lot code stamped under the mat. Behavioral leakage again, tiny cracks spreading across a polished facade. So what finally made the case courtroom tight? It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was the quiet convergence of independent facts. The fiber's chemical voice, the trunk's matching shed, the victim's fibers anchored inside the car, the route data, and the suspect's own unnecessary explanations. Stay with me, because in a moment we'll test the hardest question of all. How strong is a single fiber when defense attorneys try to pull it apart? And what jurors really hear when science takes the stand? The strength of a single fiber is not in claiming uniqueness, it is in how clearly it ties a story together. Jurors need clarity, so the scientists walked them through the journey. First, they showed micrographs, the tri-lobed cross-section turning like a tiny propeller. Then they laid the dye spectrum beside the manufacturer's reference curve. Finally, they mapped the production lot to models sold in this region. Each step answered one question until the thread led back to the car and the man who drove it. But here is the unexpected truth. Fiber evidence is class evidence. It does not name an individual the way DNA can. Good experts say that out loud. Instead of claiming certainty, they speak in likelihoods. Given the chemical recipe, the cross-section shape, and the exact dye signature, how probable is it to encounter the same fiber from a random source? The answer wasn't zero, but it shrank toward vanishing when combined with the route data, the trunk collection, and the victim's fibers anchored in the car's rubber trim. The defense tried to stretch the thread. They raised contamination. The lab responded with chain of custody logs, blank controls, and documented cleaning protocols for vacuums, tweezers, and mounting slides. They raised secondary transfer. The scientists cited persistent studies showing how many fibers move during brief contact, how many survive a drive, and how humidity or fabric type changes loss rates. They raised the prosecutor's fallacy. The expert corrected it in plain words. A rare fiber does not mean a rare person, but the chance of the same fiber appearing in this place, at this time, on these items, without direct contact, is extraordinarily low. To ground the science, the prosecution staged a simple demonstration. A swatch of trunk liner like the suspect's was pressed against a jacket like the victim's. Under gentle movement, no theatrics, identical tri-lobed blue-green fibers transferred and persisted. Jurors could see how an invisible trace becomes a visible story. Pattern interrupt. If one thread can tell a story, what happens when you add a second? They did. In the crevice of the trunk latch, examiners found a tiny fragment of clear polymer consistent with a tag fastener, again bearing the victim's fiber on its edge. Not headline material by itself, but in context, devastating. Add phone pings, toll camera stamps, and the suspect's volunteered denial about the trunk, and the narrative tightened like a knot pulled from both ends. Psychology explains that knot. Offenders who rely on routine crave control, so they predict risks and minimize noise. They clean, they plan, they rehearse alibis. What they rarely predict is the patience of science. Fibers do not forget. The tri-lobed filament does not care about charm or excuses. It reflects light the same way every time and leaves the same spectral curve wherever it goes. That stubborn consistency is the quiet voice jurors learned to trust. When the verdict arrived, it was not because the fiber was treated as a miracle. It was because the evidence, human and scientific, lined up and pointed the same way. Survivors' accounts matched the route. The car matched the production lot. The trunk matched the fiber. And the suspect's words matched the profile of someone who believes rules apply to everyone else. So what can we learn from a single strand? First, precision beats theatrics. Second, honest language about probabilities earns more trust than exaggeration. Third, facts change big cases when they are measured, tested, and repeated without shortcuts. Stay with me, because there is one more practical takeaway you can use tonight. When you enter any space you do not control, a car, a rideshare, a hallway, leave a trace of attention behind. Notice the constants others ignore. The unusual air freshener, the repeated route, the lock that sticks. Your brain will build a library of details that protect you long before you ever need a lab. And if you ever serve on a jury, remember this case. Ask whether the story is a stack of untested assumptions or a braid of independent strands that hold under pressure. In the end, the art of forensics is not about spectacle. It is about patience, humility, and patterns that refuse to lie. A murderer planned for everything he imagined. He did not plan for a fiber to outlast his story. What other truth, hiding in plain sight now, might be strong enough to do the same?